Dana White says the UFC doesn't have a superstar problem.
Who the fuck is the guy that's saying, oh, they have a superstar problem?
But when the company needed its biggest event of the year, it went back to a man who hadn't won a fight in 6 years.
Do you feel like almost like the sport needs you back, the organization needs you back?
I won't say the game needs me, but it's sure good to have me.
And that's strange, because the UFC has more champions, more events, and more fighters with millions of followers than it's ever had. So how does a company this big have nobody who can carry a card on their own? Back in April of 2024, UFC 300 did everything a card is supposed to do. A $16.5 million gate with over 20,000 people through the doors at T-Mobile Arena, making it the third highest grossing event in UFC history at the time.
You set out to make this the greatest night in combat sports history.
I mean, I did. We're the bells and whistles guys. We do all the, and then once the show starts, it's out of our hands and it's up to them. And when you have a night that looks like the greatest night ever in combat sports on paper and then absolutely delivers, it's the best.
But according to Dave Meltzer at the Wrestling Observer, that card sold 615,000 pay-per-views at $79.99 each. Usman and Masvidal did 700,000 in their rematch at UFC 261, and Ferguson and Gaethje did the same at UFC 249 on a card with nowhere near the same billing. Conor McGregor reportedly holds the second, third, fourth, and fifth biggest sellers in UFC history as well. And Ronda Rousey passed 1 million buys twice on her own.
Conor is obviously the biggest superstar, not just in this sport, but in any sport.
So the single greatest card the UFC has ever assembled did about a quarter of what one Irishman did alone. It didn't get better from there. 3 weeks later, UFC 301 in Rio had a flyweight title fight and Jose Aldo on it, and it sold 67,000. Then it was 410,000 for Makhachev and Poirier, 274,000 for Pereira and Prohaska on International Fight Week, 240,000 that January, and 176,000 for a middleweight rematch not long after that. By August 2025, the same drop turned up in Disney's own earnings report. Analyst Robert Joyner spotted it buried in the numbers. ESPN paid the UFC less in the third quarter of that year than the year before, and the reason given was fewer buys per event. In his eyes, the UFC needed a superstar for those numbers to come back, something a lot of people in the media picked up on too.
Does the UFC, in your opinion, have a star problem? Do they not have big enough names? It's not even a question.
It's not even a question. It's not even a question.
And how does that make you feel? Like, how do you feel about that as someone who's attracted to the larger-than-life characters, who talks to them, who interacts with them?
It surprises me because over the years, I've always felt like if star A vanishes or disappears, the UFC quickly finds star B. They're replaced so quickly. You can go back to the Chuck Liddell, Tito Ortiz time, and then who's going to replace them? And all of a sudden, BJ Penn and GSP emerge. But now I'm like, where are they?
The only trouble was, there wasn't one in sight. So what's the problem? For starters, there's the recent dominance of wrestling compared to some of the other disciplines.
Wrestling's the most important discipline for MMA, I think. Yeah, I think it's the foundation, because the wrestler can dictate where the fight takes place. If the wrestler chooses to stand, he can stand. If the wrestler wants to get back up, he can get back up.
Right.
And the wrestler knows how to take the guy down, whereas, even though every fight starts standing up, and it's a big advantage for the striker while they're standing up. With the wrestler, if the wrestler knows how to strike, the striker has to think about two different things simultaneously.
Yeah.
Has to think, maybe this guy's going to shoot, and what if this guy punches me? What if this guy kicks me?
Right.
So there's so many more options that the wrestler has, and there's that threat of the takedown that looms large that paralyzes guys with anticipation.
But a lot of wrestlers got called boring no matter how good they are, and that's followed the sport since Khabib, especially when you pair that with someone who doesn't talk much, like Islam Makhachev. He's one of the most dominant champions the sport's ever had, but he's kind of quiet on the trash talk front. And when he does discuss other fighters, it doesn't hit the same as a fighter who really leans into the verbal warfare.
Maybe 5-6 months ago, I meet Diaz in the elevator in Wynn Hotel.
The Wynn Hotel,
Vegas.
yeah.
He go to cross to me and say respect. Just walk. But what changed now? When the a lot of cameras come, they always people change, you know.
More and more off the top of the card comes out of Dagestan, Georgia, and Brazil now, and a fighter doing his press conference through a translator is a harder sell to a casual crowd. Then Ilya Topuria turned up. He speaks a few languages, he's cocky, he finishes people, and the second he won the belt, his following exploded. There's Sean Strickland too, who turns basically every press conference into a clip machine on his own.
Here's the thing, dude. Do I think that, like, do you want to see two terrorist Muslims fight each other, right? Like, what? No one gives. I mean, again, more than likely, Chimaev's gonna take down Imavov and just dry hump him for, nobody gives a about two foreigners fighting.
Well, if you or Anthony won this, you might fight him at the White House, Card.
Yeah, it'd be funny bringing terrorists to the White House, but no, yeah. I mean, it won't surprise me with this administration. You know, I feel like Trump would do that.
So personality isn't exactly in short supply. Dana White's even been pretty open about who's actually been building these guys recently.
If you look at the people that have been built, you know, it is impossible to deny that Nina Drama has built some of these guys, from Marab to Sean Strickland, Armin. You know, and these guys are smart. They lean into the relationship with her.
And it does work, up to a point. The clips rack up millions of views, the follower counts jump, but the pay-per-view numbers stay exactly where they were. Sean O'Malley was the closest thing the UFC had to a homegrown social media star, with millions of followers and a promotional push behind him that almost nobody else on the roster got. He still never sold anywhere near what those numbers said he should. So yeah, the attention's there. The UFC can generate it whenever it wants. But if that's true, why does none of it stick to the guys at the very top? Combat sports are as global as it gets. Staying connected is essential when you're traveling halfway around the world. I flew out for a card overseas not long ago. Hotel Wi-Fi charged by the hour, a data plan that didn't work half the places I went. I nearly missed weigh-in sitting in a cab outside the venue watching my phone spin in circles. That's why I recommend Saily. Saily is an eSIM app that lets you get affordable mobile data in over 200 destinations. You install everything before your trip, and as soon as you land, it automatically connects you to a local network. No local SIM cards, no outrageous roaming fees, and no wasting time hunting for Wi-Fi before the main card starts. Saily also includes built-in security features that block malicious websites, online trackers, and annoying ads while you're browsing. Download the Saily app before your next trip and use code MARK15 at checkout to get 15% off your Saily eSIM data plan. That's 15% off with code MARK15 or visit saily.com/MARK15 or use the link in today's episode description. Now, let's get back to the fights. When it comes to stars in today's game, Khamzat Chimaev is one of the guys right at the top of the list. He turned up as the most hyped prospect the sport had seen in years, and 15 fights in, he still hadn't lost, which is what finally got him the middleweight title shot against Dricus du Plessis. Chimaev won, but then on May 9th, 2026 at UFC 328, Sean Strickland took it straight back on a split decision.
I was nut riding for Strickland the whole time. I was like, that guy is the captain of the deep water. He knows how to go into deep water, man, and he knows how to survive. He can survive. And the thing about Khamzat is, if he takes you down, he wants to hold you down and just beat on you and not expand a lot of energy like he did with Dricus.
That's an issue.
You can't do that with Sean. Mm-hmm. Sean is not going to sit still. He's very hard to hold down. He's got super underrated grappling. Super underrated. You know, when you saw he almost threw Khamzat, like later in the fight, you know, and he did wind up on top multiple times. Like, he ain't easy for anybody.
Far from it.
And he had a blown out shoulder.
Boom. That's the other thing. Everyone's like, well, you know, Khamzat was compromised because the weight cut. It's like, well, hold on.
Sean had one arm.
Sean had one arm.
And just like that, the unbeaten story was over. At light heavyweight, it happened even faster. Alex Pereira lost his belt to Magomed Ankalaev at UFC 313 back in March of 2025. He took it back inside a round at UFC 320 that October, then moved up to heavyweight and got stopped by Cyril Gane in the second at the White House card. And Ilya Topuria got higher than any of them before it happened to him too, knocking out Charles Oliveira for the lightweight belt and getting talked about as the best fighter on the planet. Then his own corner pulled him out on the stool against Justin Gaethje.
I know that he has the skill to be a champion again. However, same thing with Tony Ferguson. I didn't break Tony Ferguson's confidence. I changed the perception of his opponents of him. And that is a huge factor when you go in there. Like, who are you fighting? What do you know, before this, he was a guy that you couldn't get through, that you couldn't push through, you couldn't survive with. And once I showed people that all you gotta do is get through that, then nobody's ever gonna go in there with thinking that he's unbeatable now.
3 champions, 3 collapses, and none of them got the time to breathe because of how often the UFC actually asks them to fight. There were 42 events in 2025, with 43 planned for 2026, and 13 of them numbered cards. That's a fight week most weeks of the year. Compare that to what it used to take. Ronda Rousey had 3 years at the top before anyone touched her. Conor had 5, long enough to turn one rivalry with Khabib into something 2 entire countries cared about. Go back a generation further to Anderson Silva, GSP, and John Jones, and their reigns ran for years on end. Silva alone held the belt for nearly 7.
Anderson Silva was the guy, honestly, that made me go, wow, you know, this dude's different. He's different, you know, and I talked about this last week where I said I was in Philadelphia, but it's like, he just was like almost like a rock star, you know, and everybody in the world knew Anderson Silva.
None of these guys got anywhere near that. A star takes years to build, and the calendar just keeps starting new stories before the last one gets the chance to finish. The UFC is very good at making fights. It just doesn't give anyone long enough to become an event on their own, which meant that when the promotion needed one night that actually mattered, it only had one name left it could fully trust to sell it. On July 11, 2026, at T-Mobile Arena, Conor stepped back in for the first time since 2021 against Max Holloway. And even with so much time away, he was still far and away the biggest name in the sport.
This is why I'm back, for the love of the game and the love of the fans. It's great to be back here in Las Vegas, you know, 5 years out. But I'm fighting since I came out of the womb, and I'll be fighting until the day I go out. So this is another day for McGregor, baby.
He had close to 47 million Instagram followers heading in, roughly 10 times what most of the current champions have between them, and the streaming numbers for that card matched the White House event from a few weeks earlier. So the pull was still there, and for one night, it looked like the UFC had its biggest star back. Then he threw a jumping kick, and his knee went the second he landed on it.
I mean, I was expecting at least a one-round war, or, you know, who knew what Conor was capable of as far as cardio or whatever else after a 5-year layoff, and well, there you go. I mean, we're assuming blown ACL.
He tried to keep fighting anyway, but the referee waved it off at 1 minute and 9 seconds of the first round, and the building booed. It was his 4th loss in 5 fights. The UFC had built its biggest night of the year around a man who hadn't fought since 2021, and the whole thing was finished inside of a round. Turns out, there could be a reason the UFC keeps ending up back at that same door.
I think Dana has made a point over, I mean, this has been the last 15 years of trying to almost like quell the stars, trying to not let the stars get too big, and like Conor got too big.
Yeah, but see, I gotta disagree a little bit.
Why is that?
Because I feel that they did everything to try to push you into the mainstream to make you a star. That's why I was able to do the things that I did, because they continuously pushed me in front of people to make me a star, Ben. And that's not me going, well, I'm a UFC guy, I love the UFC. Yeah. I was the champion for a long time. Yeah. So I know what they did for me as a champion to try and make sure that I was recognizable.
Either way, the result's pretty much the same. When the company needed a night that actually mattered, the biggest name it had access to hadn't won a fight in years. And the strangest part is, the UFC watched those buy numbers slide for 2 straight years and barely reacted. By August 2025, it became clear why. On August 11th, 2025, the UFC announced a 7-year media rights deal with Paramount worth $7.7 billion.
The UFC on ESPN deal equaled out to approximately $500 to $550 million a year. That was after they extended it, the 2 extra years, all that in the ballpark of 500 to 550. The numbers have been quoted differently, but that's the general gist. This one, in the ballpark of $1.1 billion a year over 7 years. Yes, the UFC to Paramount deal is for 7 years, $1.1 billion a year equaling approximately $7.7 billion.
That works out to a little over $1 billion a year against roughly $500 million a year on the ESPN deal it replaced. And it did away with pay-per-view completely. From 2026 onward, every event streams on Paramount Plus in the US at no extra cost, with some of the numbered cards also going out on CBS. 13 big cards and 30 fight nights a year, all included in the one price, which meant those numbers from earlier, the 615,000, the 67,000, stopped being anybody's problem. The money shows up on a schedule now.
Beginning in 2026, as far as the UFC is concerned, pay-per-view is dead. For the first time in the UFC's history, they will no longer be in the pay-per-view business.
It's tied to the calendar, not to how many people wanted to see one specific man fight. So when Dana White went on Impulsive and got asked about the whole star problem, he gave the same answer he's been giving for years.
So when I listen to shit like, we have a superstar problem, or we have this problem, we have that problem, my response to that is, believe me when I tell you, we have no problems.
And from where he's sitting, that's kind of fair. The company built itself a deal where it genuinely doesn't need another Conor McGregor to make its money back. What that deal doesn't do is make a new one show up. The UFC can still build a megastar if it wants to, it's just been paid enough that it doesn't have to anymore. So if the promotion has no real reason left to go build one, where's the next one supposed to come from? If you had to bet on it, the smart money's on a fighter who doesn't hold a UFC belt at all. Even though Paddy Pimblett had his critics at first, he's fought his way to the top, winning more and more fans along the way.
I'm just the main man, lad. Yeah. I'm the one that everyone wants the interviews with. I'm the one that everyone wants the pictures with and to come and see, and it's just a fact. I am the main man now, lad, and people who want to dispute it can, but they know they're wrong now.
He started getting the loudest reactions out of everyone on fight night, and his walkouts were getting almost as much attention as the fights. And by early 2026, when he walked into UFC 324 chasing the interim lightweight title against Justin Gaethje, he was already one of the most talked about lightweights on the entire roster. He lost the fight over 5 rounds on the scorecards, but after a war like that, his stock didn't drop at all. In fact, it went up.
I don't know the way you guys, but he gained so much respect in that last fight. Like, my social team is telling me, after that last loss, he gained like 2 million followers on social media, like from that night to the next morning.
That's not normal for a fighter coming up short in the biggest fight of his career, but then Paddy's never really built his following the normal way.
I started fighting when I was 16, training when I was 15, so lad, I've said it before, I reckon in a past life, lad, I was a gladiator in the Coliseum because I was just meant to do this.
From there, he spent years turning down offers, building an audience with his fighting style and his content. By the time he actually walked into the UFC in September 2021, the crowd was already his. He just kept giving them reasons to stick around. He beat Michael Chandler with a run of elbows that ended the fight outright, and he talked openly about his own mental health at a time when nobody in the sport would. Then came the Conor comeback card, the biggest event of the year, with fans all over the world tuning in to see Notorious work his magic. But before Conor even stepped into the octagon, Paddy had already locked up a Darce choke on Benoit Saint-Denis and got the tap at 52 seconds. In front of all those people, and probably a ton of new fans, he showed out in the best possible way.
He's exceeded all my expectations with him as well. I always knew Paddy was good, but every fight Paddy's had in the UFC, you know, you get people, he had a lot of hate, you get people saying, he's going to lose, and I always was like, he's actually not, you know, he's got such an awkward style. He's fucking big for the weight. And mate, he's just getting better and better and better. Yeah, he needs to brush up on his striking. He does, but that doesn't actually matter when you can wrap fucking submissions up like that. So Paddy's impressing me loads.
So yeah, Dana can go on a podcast and say there's no superstar problem, and in a strange way, he's right. Because on the one night the UFC bet everything on a name from a decade ago, the fighter who actually walked out as the story wasn't one the UFC built. He built that following himself years before the promotion ever put his name on a card. Nobody's saying he's the next Conor yet, but out of everyone currently on that roster, he's the one closest to arriving as a star already made, rather than waiting for the UFC to make him one. Paddy proved a fighter can still build himself into a star with or without the UFC's help, but not every fighter gets that chance. Some watch the UFC actively get in the way of their own potential, and few fighters have had that happen to them worse than Tom Aspinall. To see how, check out this video next. Thanks for watching.